Father, I thank you. Thank you for another night to be here at your church, Lord, to be in your house. Thank you for another night to be here worshiping you. Father, I pray that you'll be with Layla and the McCarter family. I pray that you'll give her comfort and healing. I pray that you'll be with the doctors as they work on her and give them wisdom. Father, I pray that you'll be with the McCarters and you'll give them your comfort and your peace, Lord, through this time. I just pray that you'll be with us all tonight as we again dive into this topic of Islam, Lord, and that your truth will continue to shine through, that we will grow stronger in our faith and as we hear about this, Lord, and that it'll give us opportunities to speak to other people about you, Muslim and non-Muslim. I just thank you again, Father, and ask this all in your name. Amen. Sorry about that. I promise all I did was flip the switch. So today is Eid al-Adha. I'm sure you all knew that. It is the Feast of the Sacrifice. So it's one of the two feasts in the Muslim calendar. It's the last day of the Hajj. If you remember, the Hajj is the pilgrimage to Mecca. Pastor Mike sent me a video the other day. Forgot to tell you I watched it, but I did. And it showed a lot of the Muslim pilgrims showing up in Mecca in these tents and wherever they could stay. It's a couple million people that come in every year to perform the Hajj. So today's feast, they're celebrating Abraham's willingness to sacrifice his son Ishmael. So you guys probably remember that story. But so Ishmael in Islam is the son of the promise, and he would go on to then move down to Mecca, where he would build, along with his father Abraham, they would build the Kaaba, where they would worship Allah there until it was taken over by the pagans, and then Muhammad came to restore it. So I thought that was interesting today when I saw that in the news. I saw Mayor Mamdani up in New York celebrating, along with Ocasio-Cortez up there at one of the celebrations. So the past couple weeks, we've been looking at Islam. We started the first week, Islam 101, where we went through some of the doctrines as well as the 5 pillars of the faith. Last week, we dug into the central figure of Islam, the Prophet Muhammad. So just a kind of a quick recap about Muhammad. So Muslims would say that Muhammad is the perfect example. He is the perfect expression of Islam. He is who they should follow. He is who they should strive to be. They should strive to emulate him. Now, Muhammad was born in 570 CE in Mecca. He lost his parents relatively young. He lost his father before he was born, his mother when he was age 6, his grandfather when he was 8. And so he spent the rest of his childhood with his uncle, where he worked with him as a caravan trader, traveling all around the Arabian Peninsula, up into Syria, Iraq, Persia, and back down into the Arabian Peninsula. He did that for several years, even going to work as a young man for a widow, Khadijah, who he ended up marrying. And it wasn't until he was 40 years old that while he was out in a cave performing a kind of spiritual pilgrimage out there trying to pray and have some visions, he was visited by what he believed to be a demon at the time. It pressed him into the ground, it squeezed him, and it growled at him and told him that to read. And when he said he couldn't read, it told him to recite. And he panicked because he thought he was now possessed by Satan, and he became suicidal. And his wife, Khadijah, convinced him that this was the same angel that had spoke to Moses. And like I said, he was suicidal. He would go up to the mountains. He tried to do it several times, tried to leap to his death. But every time the angel would show up and say he was Gabriel and he was here to give him the word from Allah, to give him the Quran. So for the next 23 years, he would have these revelations where he would teach, and the words that he said were said to be the direct words of Allah speaking to the people. So he began his teaching at his home in Mecca, where he wasn't really accepted. He had few converts. Most of them were his family. One of his first male converts was a man named Abu Bakr. He'll come into play later. So while he was there for 12 years, like I said, not a whole lot happened, not a whole lot of followings. His teachings were very tolerant. We'll talk about that some more later. But he was eventually ran out of town. His wife passed away. His uncle passed away. And he fled eventually to the city of Medina, where he was welcomed by the Jewish tribe, the 3 Jewish tribes that were there. So he settles. He is now a Muslim refugee, and the Jews allow him in. So now he starts having followers come to live with him there. They don't have work. They don't have money. So he allows them, he has a revelation where he allows them to raid the Meccan caravans as they're traveling through. So this is the start of the military age of Muhammad. He had, during this time, also brokered a peace treaty with the Jews there. He ends up breaking this treaty once he becomes strong and powerful. He runs 2 of the tribes out and then eventually massacres the 3rd tribe, massacres all the men and takes the women and children into slavery. So he ends up fighting with the Meccans, taking a large army to Mecca, where they eventually surrender, and he is merciful on them as long as they submit to his authority and convert to Islam. He allows the Jews and the Christians to remain Jews and Christians as long as they submit and pay the tax and become a lesser class of citizen. Now, this is in the year 630. 2 years later, he dies unexpectedly, most likely as a result of poisoning from one of his wives. So, like I said, tonight we're going to talk about the Quran. So those were the revelations that Muhammad would receive from the angel Gabriel. So the Quran is to Muslims the eternal word of Allah himself. So think about that. It's not that he just received it at that time, that's when it came into being. It has always existed. So it existed with Allah in heaven, in Arabic. The Quran holds in Islam the same place that Jesus holds in Christianity. Where we see Jesus as the Word, they see the Quran as that. There was actually some, I guess you would call inquisitions in Islamic history, where they killed a bunch of people for claiming that the Quran had always existed in heaven, because then it kind of messes with their monotheism a little bit, and Allah being one. But they eventually settled on that. So Nabil Qureshi, in his book, No God But One, he wrote, "Since Muslims believe the Quran is an eternal expression of Allah, they do not think that the Quran was written by men in any sense. It is the very speech of Allah, inscribed on a heavenly tablet, from which it was read by Gabriel and dictated to Muhammad. It is not inspired in the Christian sense of inspiration, but rather it is revealed. Allah revealed it piecemeal to Muhammad, dictating it through the angel Gabriel. Muhammad had nothing to do with shaping the text. He only relayed it." So that is the Muslim view of the Quran. It's a miracle that if they were going to attribute a miracle to Muhammad in his life, it would be the Quran. Because I was watching a video, they were interviewing this Muslim on the street, and they asked him why he converted to Islam. He was a recent convert, and he said, "I read the Quran, and it was a miracle. How else could an illiterate man have produced the most perfect book to have ever existed?" They also believe that the Quran is perfectly preserved. This is a quote. They say, "Dot for dot, letter for letter, no differences. The Quran that was given to Muhammad is the exact Quran that the Muslims have today." So, what is the Quran exactly? The Quran is divided into 114 chapters known as surahs. So if I say surah, 6:14, that would be their chapter and verse. They're primarily arranged from longest to shortest. It's written in what is called classical Arabic. So this is a language, they say it existed in heaven. It is the language of Allah. So because of this, the Quran is to be read, memorized, and recited in this same classical Arabic. Now, this dialect of Arabic isn't even spoken today. It would be similar to us speaking Shakespearean English. Now, the Quran is translated into other languages. You can find it in English, but they say that when they do these translations, that some of the meaning will be lost. You have to keep it in the original. So if you Google a verse from the Quran, which I've done a lot lately, the first result is usually going to be Quran.com. So, every time you Google something now, you get the AI overview. Generally, that's going to be Quran.com, and then that's going to be the first website that pops up. And I heard something interesting this week about that translation of the Quran. And it was from this guy, a professor from a college in Egypt. He was visiting Canada, and he was in a taxi, and he was speaking with the taxi driver, and the taxi driver was like, they were talking about religion, and found out he was Muslim. And so the taxi driver said, I've met a lot of nice Muslims, but I read the Quran, and that book is evil. So his thinking was, I'm going to make an English translation that kind of clears up some of these harder to read passages for the Western audience, kind of softens it up a bit. So when we Google the Quran and we get the Quran.com translation, you're going to get a softer version of some of these harder verses. So I've been intentionally skipping that one and going and reading other ones so I can get the real thing. Now, the vast majority of the Quran is Allah speaking to Muhammad, except the first surah, which is a prayer, so that it was the people speaking to Allah. And there was even some arguments between the original scribes when they were compiling the Quran about whether or not to even include that, because the Quran is the word of God, word of Allah. Why are we going to include a prayer of us speaking to him? Now, the verses, like I said, they were meant to be spoken and memorized in the classic Arabic. And when they were spoken at the time, when Muhammad was reciting them, they had a rhythm and a rhyme to them, a pattern. So think similar to like a rap music or like a spoken word poem. They were meant to be catchy, and so people would hear them and memorize them and repeat them. It wasn't really meant to be written down at the time. They were a very oral culture, not a whole lot of reading and writing at the time. There's no real narrative in the Quran. In order to get one story about a character, you have to go usually to a bunch of different places and pull the verses that speak about that character. And since it's written like that, or compiled like that, it doesn't really provide a whole lot of context for its verses. So now you need the hadith, which are the traditions and teachings of Muhammad. You need these to put those verses from the Quran in context. So imams and clerics and Muslim scholars have spent 1,400 years now trying to piece together what was taught at what time, what Quranic verses came from which times based on the hadiths. And there's thousands of hadiths. Some of them are accepted, some of them are not. So most Muslims rely on their imams and their clerics to interpret the passages of the Quran through the hadith and pass on the meanings to them. So how was the Quran compiled? Like I said, Muhammad was receiving it and he was speaking it, but he didn't read or write. He was illiterate, so he wasn't writing this stuff down. And it wasn't given all at once. It was various teachings that were given over a 23-year period. Now, he had some scribes that were part of his followers, so they would kind of write down his revelations on whatever they had available. So sometimes it was dried palm leaves, sometimes it was pieces of bone, scraps of parchment, whatever they had available, they would try and write some of this down, or they would try and memorize it. So it wasn't recorded in one singular place. Different scribes had different parts of it, or sometimes they had different versions of what they had written down. There was a story I heard, it's from one of the hadith, where Muhammad was walking and he heard one of his followers reciting a piece of the Quran. And Muhammad was like, I like that, put that in there. And it was like, I thought you said these were the words of Allah, and now here's a guy saying something slightly different than what you had said, but you liked it, so you said to put it in. So they would memorize and recite these teachings as a group. They would pray them, so they would try and memorize them. There were followers that memorized the vast majority of his teachings. There's Muslims today that can recite the Quran in its entirety. After Muhammad's unexpected death, he had no succession plan. He wasn't expecting to die at the time, so he had nobody appointed to be the next leader. So his father-in-law, one of his earliest converts that I mentioned earlier, Abu Bakr, now his father-in-law, he was the father of Muhammad's child bride, Aisha, that I mentioned last week. And he was one of the earliest converts from Mecca. He fought in all the battles, all 66 battles that Muhammad led his followers in. And so he decides he's going to take charge. He becomes the first caliph or khalifa, which means successor. So he tries to take charge. Now remember, Mecca and this Arabian region, it's a tribal culture. And so tribes want to stick together. So once this guy that they had decided to follow, whether out of belief or obligation, not wanting to die, not wanting to pay money, some of them went back to their original beliefs. They're like, he's dead. We're going to go back to what we were doing. Or maybe one of the tribal leaders would be like, maybe I'm the prophet. Maybe I'm in charge now. So Abu Bakr decides, I need to do something about this. So he leads what is called the Apostate War. Now, he was only in charge for 2 years after Muhammad died before he was assassinated. But in this time, he needed to solidify his position. The groups were breaking off. Other people were trying to take charge. So he murders a bunch of people that opposed him. He goes to war, killing a lot of these people. Now, this solidifies the doctrine that those who leave Islam should be killed. In Surah 5:33, it says, "The punishment of those who wage war against Allah and His apostle is that they should be murdered or crucified." Many of the hadiths give the context of those, that this is those that leave Islam. There's another recording in the hadith that says, "Kill whomever changes his faith." So this was Abu Bakr's legacy, was basically keeping Islam together. Because without him, it would have fractured and probably died out at the time. Now, I like to contrast that with the beginnings of Christianity, where Jesus dies and it grows. It doesn't grow through war, it goes through persecution. Whereas war and subjugation was the only thing that kept Islam together. Now, after he was assassinated, the next guy that takes charge, this is where I nerd out over history for a little bit. The second caliph, his name was Umar. He led for 10 years until he too was assassinated, if you're sensing a theme. So he took Islam from a collection of tribes to a more structured state and starting to become closer to an empire. Interesting fact about him is he also helped bring about the Dark Ages. So he, in year 641, conquers into Egypt. He conquers Alexandria. You've probably heard of the Library of Alexandria, so the oldest library in the world at the time. So he shows up, and this is his quote about that when asked what to do with the library. He says, "Touching the books you mentioned, if what is written about them agrees with the Quran, they're not required. If it disagrees, they are not desired. Destroy them, therefore." So, in other words, if it agrees with the Quran, we don't need it because we got the Quran. If it disagrees with the Quran, we really don't need it, so just burn it down. So as he conquers Egypt, this also cuts off the supply of papyrus, so this causes a decline in literacy and helps lead to the Dark Ages. Now, after he's assassinated, the third caliph, Uthman, led for 12 years. He was also assassinated. So he was known as the possessor of two lights because he was married to two of Muhammad's daughters. So he was most known for standardizing the Quran. So that whole history lesson was just to get to that. But I get sidetracked by history. So he was known for standardizing the Quran. So at his time where he's leading, he's hearing that there are variations of what is being recited. And he doesn't like that. So he compiles a committee to organize the Quran and get rid of these many different variations that were being used and centralize it. Now, the problem was that many of the scribes who had written stuff down and the men who had memorized the Quran died in the apostate war. So he has to try and gather up what's left. There's even in the hadith, Aisha, who was one of Muhammad's wives, records that several chapters or surahs of the Quran were eaten by one of their goats. So they gather up everything, they make one standard version, and then they burn all the rest of it. So the first Quran burning was done by Muslims to control the narrative, to control what was in it and what was being taught. Now, contrast this very controlling, closed transmission of the Quran with the openness of the transmission of the New Testament. So you had Paul and the other apostles writing letters to churches who were copying the letters down and passing them on to other churches, who were copying them down and passing them on to other churches, to where we have thousands and thousands of manuscripts of the New Testament. And yes, there are variations, textual variations, in those because there was no check on who was doing the copying. There was no central authority that was governing what was said and what was written in there. It was just the free flow of information between the churches. But what we find when we take all of that evidence together is we have a very, very, very good picture of the original words that were given to the apostles. Now, Muslims will say that their book has been perfectly preserved, and yet within 12 years of Muhammad dying, you have a central figure changing and editing what is in their text. So what does the Quran teach? So it teaches from two very distinct periods in Muhammad's ministry, the Meccan period and the Medinan period. So the Meccan passages, they emphasize a belief in Allah, a belief in the day of judgment, descriptions of heaven and hell. He calls for adherence to good morals, for example, truthfulness, kindness to relatives, kindness to the elderly and to your neighbors. He's more tolerant of Christians and Jews. There are warnings to the polytheists there in Mecca. He does this through stories of previous prophets and messengers and the punishment that they brought to the people that rejected their message. So he wasn't necessarily teaching anything new at the time. He was repackaging stories that the Meccans had already heard, a lot of it from other religions. They had a nickname for him. He was called the ear because he just heard stuff and repeated it. And so he was saying a lot of stuff, and the Meccans were like, bro, you're not telling us anything we haven't heard. Leave us alone. So, like we said last week, he gets run out of Mecca, gets to Medina, and so the Medinan surahs are the second phase. So now Muhammad has more followers, and the verses, they teach more about the law, more about governing, how you run your family, teach more about money, how you deal with hypocrites. Some of the verses are now Muhammad speaking as well as establishing his authority and position of authority and leadership. So instead of just Allah speaking through him, he is now throwing in some of his own stuff to establish who he is. So this is where we get into jihad. And the Christians and the Jews, they start becoming the enemy. They become a lesser class known as the dhimmi class. They have to submit and pay a tax known as the jizya to continue to follow their belief system. So if I want to stay a Christian, I have to submit to their authority, I have to be a lesser citizen, and I have to pay them, and probably still get beaten and all that stuff along the way. So either you submit, you have to submit, and whether that's through conversion, to Islam, paying the jizya, or you die. Those are your choices. So how can we have some of these contradictory teachings between the different periods? They have a doctrine called abrogation, which basically means that some teachings supersede the older teachings. How do you figure out what those are? Again, that's where all the Muslim scholars have to come in and scour through all the hadiths to see which teachings and which verses supersede the others. So this is my favorite kind of textual criticism word. Wes Huff, if you're familiar with him, he likes to say it. He says the Quran lacks verisimilitude, which means it's the appearance of being real, something that makes a book seem believable or authentic. The Quran lacks that. If you read stuff in it, you're like, that's not really what history tells us. So some examples of that, we already talked about Abraham sacrificing his son Ishmael, who they put as the son of the promise, and then Abraham and Ishmael coming to Mecca and building the Kaaba. There's no historical evidence that Abraham ever came that far south. Joseph in Egypt saying that he would be crucified and birds would eat his head. This is in Surah 12. Now this is Joseph, one of the sons of Jacob, and at the time, crucifixion didn't exist for like another 1,000 years. There's a surah about Ezra being worshipped as the son of God by the Jews. There's no group of Jews anywhere that they can find written down that ever worshipped Ezra as the son of God. If you're familiar with the story of Haman in the book of Esther, Haman in the Quran is a figure in Pharaoh's court during the time of Moses. So we're, again, 1,000 years plus off. And while he is serving in the court of Pharaoh, Moses comes to confront Pharaoh, and Haman's the bad guy, and he also convinces Pharaoh to build a tower so he can reach God. So we've just mixed three stories all together right there. So again, the Quran lacks verisimilitude. It lacks that appearance of being real and being authentic. So what does the Quran teach about Jesus? So you may have seen a so-called Christian conservative figure who recently posted that, you guys, he said, you guys, they don't want you to know this, but Muslims love Jesus. That was Tucker Carlson, if you didn't see that. So Jesus in the Quran, his name is Isa ibn Maryam, Jesus the son of Mary. So again, another example of that lacking the appearance of authenticity. Maryam is listed as the daughter of Imran, the sister of Aaron. And Imran is the father of Moses and Aaron and Mary. It's a big gap there. So Muslim scholars will say, well, that just means she's from that line. That's not what it says, but that's what they explain it as. So another example of Muhammad mixing up stories, and it's really just because he's heard all these stories, but he has no idea of the timeline. And so Muslims will not grant that, hey, maybe he was just confused and didn't, they will not entertain that. It's just that we have it wrong. So Isa was born of a virgin. He performed miracles. He was given the title of Messiah. Again, Muhammad not understanding what that meant. In Surah 4, 171, he says, O people of the Scripture, do not commit excess in your religion or say about Allah except the truth. The Messiah, Jesus the son of Mary, was but a messenger of Allah, and his word which he directed to Mary, and a soul created at a command from him. So believe in Allah and his messengers, and do not say, 3, desist, it is better for you. Indeed, Allah is but one God. Exalted is he above having a son. To him belongs whatever is in the heavens and whatever is on the earth, and sufficient is Allah as disposer of affairs. So again, Muhammad had a fundamental misunderstanding of the Trinity. He understood the Trinity to be God the Father, Jesus the Son, and Mary the mother. That was what he thought the Trinity was, which is why he painted Christians as polytheists. So when you read these surahs, you can kind of see that in there, saying that God did not have a son, he was not a father, Jesus did not have a father, he is not God, and Mary is just a woman as well. So Surah 575 says, the Messiah, son of Mary, was not but a messenger. Other messengers have passed on before him, and his mother was a supporter of truth. They both used to eat food. Look how we make clear to them the signs, then look how they are deluded. The Quran also says that Jesus was not crucified. He said Allah made it appear that he was crucified. So they have two explanations for this. Now, if you've ever done any research into the crucifixion of Jesus, it is one of the most attested historical facts of ancient history. They have, if you want to discount the Bible as a historical reference, there are more historical references to Jesus' life and death in secular and Jewish writings than there were of the Roman emperor at the time. So they deny that, and they say that either Jesus didn't die on the cross, which is known as the swoon theory. The atheists liked to parade that one out every once in a while, that he didn't die, it just kind of looked like he passed out, he really lived. Or substitution, where Allah did not allow Jesus to go on the cross, but Simeon was executed on the cross instead of him, and then Jesus was bodily taken to heaven, where he remains until he returns at the end times. And instead of trying to rush through any more of this, we're going to stop right there. I forgot what I was going to say, so I'm just going to close in prayer. Do this a lot. Dear Lord, I thank you again for tonight. I thank you for another chance to come up here and speak, Lord, to present something that has confused and deceived a lot of people, Lord. And we have the truth, and we need to share that with them, Lord. I just pray that as we study this, we become more confident in our faith, Lord, and that we would just take it out to the world and share it with others. I ask this in your name. Amen.